Welcome once again to Breakfast Central. We start in South Africa, where the country is one step closer to processing a controversial new education law that could see parents who fail to enroll their children in school jailed for up to 12 months. The Education Committee in the country's parliament last week said it has completed all public consultations for the new Basic Education Laws Amendment Bill, better known as the BELA Bill, and will now process the feedback to bring the laws ahead.
Among the other changes that the BELA Bill proposes is for provincial governments to be able to change both language and admission policies at a school without title input or without input from the school. The bill has been met with such anxiety from parents who are concerned about their children's schooling with the new legislation. Joining us this morning to discuss this further is Catherine Sutherland, a legal researcher at the Equal Education Law Center, an organization that advocates for quality and equality in the South African education system. Good morning, Catherine. Thank you very much for joining us. Let's get into the conversation this morning. What exactly is the main purpose of the Basic Education Laws Amendment Bill? And talk to us about some of the key provisions that this bill contains.
Thanks so much for having me. So the larger purpose of this bill is to bring education law in line with developments that have happened in the last 10 years. So this is the first time that education law is being amended in 10 years. And since then, there's been a lot of amendment of the law through case law, and essentially that's not reflected in legislation. So that's one of the main purposes. Other than that, we kind of see at this point, we have a very under-resourced basic education sector, and this is sort of the moment where we're looking at the context in which our basic education laws arrived and how they were developed in the context of moving from apartheid and making sure that people were comfortable with the powers of school governing bodies in comparison to provincial education departments. But now, as we are about almost 30 years later, we haven't seen any of that change, and a lot of the original laws were fairly compromised. So trying to essentially make sure that we clarify the roles of the school governing body and the provincial education departments so that we can use the limited resources that we have in the most effective and equitable way possible is, I think, in my personal opinion, one of the fundamental points of this bill. But obviously, the bill is contentious because it does some fantastic things and it does some really concerning things. So on behalf of Equal Education Law Center, the provisions that we're concerned with are there's a provision that establishes intergovernmental committees that has to, essentially, when a learner doesn't have documentation, they're allowed to be admitted into school, but the intergovernmental committee will then supposedly help them get documentation. But this sounds great in theory, but there's many reasons why learners can't get documentation, and it's very rarely for, just because they just don't want to. So the fact that we have departments such as the South African Police Service and Home Affairs and the Department of Labour on these intergovernmental committees seems like these committees are being used for immigration control rather than to assist learners. Another provision that we're concerned about is the selling of alcohol in schools, or the limited selling of alcohol in schools during school events. In theory, it would be a nice way to make sure that schools can fundraise for themselves. But in practice, our sister organization, Equal Education, has learner members, and many of them have shown concerns about being around adults who are inebriated, and also the ability for learners to access that alcohol. And so those are the main ones.
Yeah, but there are other things that have been mentioned. Maybe it is the way that the picture has been painted. The proposed changes, of course, have been met with some unhappiness. And I'll share one, and that is that the school governing bodies that currently manage schools will have a reduced role. People are complaining about that. Someone even described it as the government trying to take, full control of how the kids in South Africa are managed and take that away from the parents and the schools. So can you put some clarity as to what exactly that means and why there's such a pushback?
So the BELA bill essentially says that HODs have to sign off on language policies and have the final say with regard to school admissions. With regard to language policies, what we're seeing happen very often is we have under-resourced schools that are filled to the brim. And next to those under-resourced schools are schools that are teaching in single medium, so in only Afrikaans. And that language policy essentially culminates to being sort of a gatekeeping mechanism for former Model C schools and well-resourced schools, because they're using public resources, but we want to basically save home language teaching. It's really important that learners are able to learn in their home language, but at the same time, we need to make sure that we're using public resources effectively and equitably. So that's one of the things that the HOD will need to consider, and the need to safeguard home language teaching is also a thing that they would need to consider. So it's about balancing both of those things. And in our opinion, that particular provision does not infringe upon the rights of school governing bodies. We're looking at the larger good for the larger, school community and under-resourced learners. And we're saying, you have the right to teach in your home language, but at the same time, we can make sure also that learners have a place in school. In terms of school admissions, one of the important things there is that the HOD does have the final say, but at the same time, school governing bodies have the right to appeal that process. And so it's really clarifying those roles rather than, taking power irrationally away from school governing bodies. And I think it really strikes a good balance in terms of acknowledging the importance of school governing bodies, in terms of, saying that school governing bodies that have representatives from learners, from parents, from teachers, and school community members have a really important role to play. But it is, we do have to take into account the effective use of resources and to make sure that every single learner has a place in school, because currently that is just not the case.
All right, let's talk about one of the problems that this bill is seeking to solve, which is to ensure that parents who do not register their children in school could be jailed for up to 12 months. Now, the South Africa public education system has come under criticism for basically the quality of education it offers, and it's offered in the past years, I would say. What would you say are some of the biggest challenges that the South Africa public education system is facing?
So first, just to touch on that particular provision, we see an increase in criminalization generally throughout the bill, which is extremely concerning, because it's absolutely not in the best interest of a learner to have their parent or primary caregiver put in prison or fined substantially. We've seen many examples of parents refusing to let their learners go to school for very good reason. Just one of those reasons could be the fact that their learners have to go to schools that have incredibly unsafe infrastructure that puts the lives of their learners in danger every single day. So in terms of that, it's not unreasonable for a parent to refuse to let their child go to that kind of school. In terms of the main issues that we're facing in South Africa, we really have a tale of two systems. The inequality within the basic education sector is enormous. The type of schooling that well-resourced school provides in comparison to an under-resourced school is, it's miles apart. And we see the impact of that drastically. So we had the PEARLS results recently, which is an international test that benchmarks literacy rates. And the results of that for South Africa was that I think it was about 81% of learners in grade 4 can't read for meaning. There's overcrowding, infrastructure is dilapidated, it's either not there or it's not maintained. We have a fantastic school nutrition program that we have seen not fairly frequently, but quite often learners aren't actually accessing that. Learners have the right to access scholar transport, and they very often aren't able to do that. So when we're talking about the issues that under-resourced schools are facing, very often the list is sort of limitless.
I mean, but is a 12-month jail time, a reasonable punishment, for not sending your child to school or not registering your child in school?
No, absolutely not. So just aside from the fact that, jail time and criminalization is, well known and well documented to really not stop things from happening, not prevent things from happening, we're not actually tackling the reasons behind the fact that that parents aren't sending their learners to school. So it's really quite unreasonable, and to leave a learner without their parent for 12 months is just quite shocking. The fact that seems like an appropriate way to make sure that learners are in school.
Okay, well.
And also, I think as we wrap up the conversation, let's find out exactly what this bill means for those who choose homeschooling or those who are doing distant education. So
that's one of the ways in which this bill really just confirms what's already in the law. It does, elaborate on it a bit, but when we speak about homeschooling, everyone has the right to choose whether to send their child to public school, homeschooling, or private school. And it's about protecting that right, but also making sure that learners are accessing quality basic education no matter where they are. So the bill really just reiterates the fact that it's necessary for parents who want to homeschool their children to register and to make sure that to allow the HOD and Provincial Education Department to make sure that they're delivering quality basic education.
Catherine Sutherland, thank you so much for your time with us this morning. We do hope that there's more clarity as to this bill, and that at the end of the day, what's best for the education sector in South Africa is what is being done.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.